What is up, most distinguished patrons of this channel? Today, since it's piss pouring rain outside and I can't do what I needed to do, I thought why not come to the shop and tear this tool apart and let's see how well it compares to the other Hercules grinder that I did in a video. So with that said, let's get into it. So it's been a while since we tore apart a grinder to look at what's inside, and I thought this would be a good candidate since, well, one, I don't really need it at this moment, and two, this thing, no joke, is so heavy that I really hate using it, and this is a 7 and 9 inch grinder. If you guys have experience with grinders like this, feel free to leave your opinion in the comments, but my opinion is that if you're put on something like this, it sucks. Yes, the discs last for a while simply because there's so much abrasives on them, but these, to me, don't remove material as fast as the smaller ones due to the fact they run at lower RPM. And the weight of this is, yeah, I'm getting older, I'll admit it, I'll freely and openly admit it, but I'm not joking, man. If you had this thing and you were on it for 8 hours straight, you're going to be hurting. Like, I don't know. I don't like these from that sense. I bought this a while ago to knock out some jobs where I had a lot of grinding to do. It was all in an area where grinding sparks and dust didn't matter, because I got to tell you, this thing will throw sparks quite a long ways. And now it's kind of been retired to the bottom of the toolbox where it never sees light, and probably, hopefully, never will again, because I don't want to have to do a job where I need something this big. So anyways, I thought it'd be interesting to look at this and compare it to see if the quality is as good as the other Hercules that we looked at. So let's start out by looking at the label. Hopefully you can see this label. What strikes me as odd right off the bat with this product is this is not UL listed. The other Hercules grinder that I ripped apart actually was UL listed, which blew my mind. This has what's called Intertech, which Intertech functions sort of like UL listing, but they seem to let anything through. So I don't know, maybe it's a case of pay $20,000 and we'll look the other way on your janky wiring, but I find that odd that this tool would not have UL listing versus the other grinder did. Now, they claim this is a 15 amp, and I would tend to believe it. I've had this thing on startup with a heavy brand new hard disk, a hard rock, trip a 20 amp breaker, so this is a torquey beast. Unfortunately, the RPM speed is 6,500 RPM by the look of it, so it's significantly slower than a conventional 4.5 inch grinder, which in my experience means slower material removal rate. The material removal, the discs last a lot longer with this, and they're not super expensive, so you get more removal per disc per dollar, but it's slower. Granted, this thing weighs so much, if you can just set it on something and let the weight of the grinder do the work, it's less fatiguing. Good luck using this in position to grind stuff down. I had to grind out some welds that were like vertical up on some equipment, and I ended up using this, and man, I got an arm workout from it. Other than what I mentioned on here, you want to be careful with tools from like Harbor Freight. It's very common to have, like, this has a UPC. Normally they have a product number. I don't see it here. Maybe it's this, I don't know, up here. It's very common to have 5, 6 product numbers for the same tool. What that means is they come out of different factories, and that's a way to track at what factory it came from. Now, the Hercules tools seem to be a lot better. The cheaper Harbor Freight, like their titanium welders are a great example. Those are often made in 3 or 4 different factories. So I might buy one, really like it. You might buy the same tool, not like it so much, and they're slightly different. I've opened enough of those tools from Harbor Freight to know that the build internally can be completely different. So if it matters to you, if you like this tool and you want to buy one, which I wouldn't recommend it because of the weight, look for the part numbers that are on here and buy that particular one. All right, let's get to opening this up. One thing that I will say right off the bat, I do not like the way they set these guards up. They have this clasp on here. There's a lot of ways to do things better. I mean, at least it's quick adjust, but I'm not a huge fan of that, nor are you probably. All right, I got the 4 screws out of this, and I thought it was pretty interesting. There seems to be like oil all over this. And I'm not sure if that's leaking from inside of here around this seal. I mean, this guard has oil on the back side. I don't see any on the disc at all up here, so I'm not sure if that came from this or if somehow, you know, something got spilled on this at one time, but I don't like that. Well, let's pry this open and see what we got in here. All right. Yeah, I don't think that oil would be coming from this. This has got that weird, like, snot grease in there, kind of like the other Harbor Freight unit that I took apart. So that must have been something on the outside, maybe. I don't know. It does look like it's leaking past this O-ring, though. Yeah, you know what? Maybe that is. Clearly, there's oil on the outside of this O-ring, and there's filth there. So this probably is not sealing as good as it should be. That's not a good sign. Anyways, let me clean some of this up, and let's take a look at it. One of the things I find interesting is where this bearing sits in here was full of all this really dark junk in here, and I think that's because stuff is seeping out of that sealed bearing and it's wearing in there, and well, it just sits in here because it has nowhere to go. This particular grease seems to be not really that great at lubricating stuff because it just kind of sits in here like in all of these little cavities, and then it's stuck. And when you look at this pinion, I didn't clean that off at all, and there's like no grease on it. And the only thing I did on here was wipe this edge, and you can see there really isn't much grease, any oil on that ring gear there. So this stuff to me just doesn't work that well, and it tends to sling right off the gears. So I don't see this stuff as being a positive. And if you got one of these, I would say annually or every 6 months, you might want to clean all of this out and put something else, maybe something with some moly in it, something a little bit better than this, because like I said, it just kind of sits where you don't need it, and then it, well, doesn't lubricate that well. I always thought that was weird when I see grease like this in stuff, but the pinion is a machine part, nut there to hold the whole assembly together, probably torque pretty tight. This, a lot of these are powdered metal nowadays, like even Metabo, I believe, from what I remember, uses powdered metal. This is a machine part as well. So this was done on a lathe, or well, a gear hob, or whatever you call it. I'm not a machinist, but this was a machine part just as the pinion. One of the things I always wondered is at what point does powdered metal break even with machining? Because with powdered metal, I mean, you don't really generally need to do that much machining after the fact, and time is money, and I would assume it would be more expensive to make this gear and that pinion and make a match and be dimensionally within tolerance than it would be just to do a powdered metal part. But what do I know? I definitely expected to find that in here, and that's not what it has. Bearing-wise, brand, it's an NSK made in China bearing. Better than I would have expected, I guess. I expected a no-name bearing in there. So we got the brushes on the side here. I'm going to not be an idiot like in all of these videos, and I'm actually going to remove the brush so it makes it easier to pull the motor apart. There we go. So looking at this, this is a step up from like a dirt cheap grinder because they do have some epoxy on these wires here to hopefully keep them from rattling apart and breaking where they're attached here and then shorting out the motor. Basically, the motor will not work properly, so that's good. And you guys got to remember, these things tend to eat a lot of dust, especially if you're using an actual grinder disc like a hard rock. Dust will get in here because it uses this as the cooling fan, so you're pulling all that junk right through this motor. So by not having epoxy helping holding this together as well as coating it to prevent nicks on the coating on this wire, you just don't get longevity out of it. Now, This is nowhere near as epoxy coated as like a Metabo or other higher end unit. So realistically, in the long run, this probably won't last as long with a lot of dust ingress into it, but it's better than, again, a low end grinder, what you could expect. There's some pretty huge slots cut in here for balancing. At least they took the time to balance this. The fact that they got cuts in here, you know, yeah, that's a pretty deep one. They did probably a decent job of balancing it, which is good, but I mean, they took out a lot of mass on it. Granted, this is a fairly decent sized electric motor for a grinder, but I would like to see a little bit better winding on here and overall build to where you wouldn't need to cut out that much material to make this run true. Wear-wise, this isn't bad at all. This tool did see a fair amount of use, of hard use, by the way. I mean, borderline stalling this, definitely breaker tripping use, and it doesn't seem to be wore too bad. The brushes are pretty substantial on this, which is to be expected due to the size of the electric motor, but these are not like soldered on. They use little terminals there. I don't know if you can see that. So they just clip on, real easy replacement. From what I remember, this tool did not come with replacement brushes, which when you use decent brushes, you don't generally need to change these that often. And honestly, the wear on these is less than I would have expected given the use that I put this through. So that's interesting. That's a good sign. This appears to be mostly all brass in there, so that's a good sign as well. It's not cheaply constructed. Let me pull this switch apart and see what's inside of there. All right, we got a lot of grinder dust in here. Magnetic grinding dust, not good for the health of any tool. Let me look at the switch here. So it's pretty hard for you to see this rating plate. I'll put up a picture of it up right now, but seems to be somewhat of a name brand switch, rated for 1.5 horsepower. I don't know if I believe that. I mean, it is a pretty substantial switch. One thing I really like about this switch, you listen to it, I have a feeling that this switch is probably never going to break or blow out on you, which is not the case on a majority of the Harbor Freight switches. As a matter of fact, the generator I used to run my welders on, the switch on that failed recently, so I have to pull start it rather than using the starter. But this is actually a decent switch. I wish they put that kind of switch in everything. You wouldn't have to worry about it failing. I'm not a huge fan of this little trigger switch here. This will not depress unless that's forward. It's kind of uncomfortable to use, and this actually takes quite a bit of force to hold shut. I mean, I guess it's not too bad, but not a fan of that, but it does work, and this probably will last. Wire size in here, it's covered with Nomex or some kind of fire retardant heat resistant wire wrap, so I can't tell you what gauge it is going into it. It's pretty small though. I mean, definitely I would say that it's probably borderline inadequate for the size motor that's in here, but again, there is airflow through this area through these, so I don't foresee the wires melting or anything, but it always blows my mind how some grinders, I mean, this is no joke, probably over 1 horsepower motor, and just that small of a wire, I don't know, on 120 volts, I don't know, that's asking a lot. The cord itself is 105 rated 14 gauge 300 volt. So decent quality cord going into this, but yeah, I don't know. Hey, engineers are smarter than me, right? They must have figured out that would work and last long enough for the projected lifetime of the tool. Anyways, I'm going to get this sucker back together and hook it up and kind of see what kind of amp draw this sucker has. So I got this gearbox back together, and there's a couple things that I thought I would mention. One, I definitely do think this grease inside of here was leaking past that little flat O-ring in here, and that's what we're seeing here is more or less that grease. That could explain why there really isn't that much inside of it. Some of it might have leaked out. And the second thing I thought was interesting is there is no shim between this gearbox cover and the gearbox head. And the reason I mention that is the clearance between that pinion and that ring gear is critical. And if it's too much or too little, you're going to have failure of the ring gear and the pinion. And normally, a lot of gearboxes, they'll use a metal shim in there to get it to where the backlash is just right. This doesn't have it, so I'm not exactly sure how they're setting backlash. They might be using a shim behind the pinion because the pinion's tapered much like this, as is the ring gear. If you move the pinion out, it will close backlash. If you move it back, it will increase it. So it's entirely possible that they set the gear setup in here with pinion shims instead of just shimming it the easier way. I don't know, but the backlash is minimal, and I would say that's within the realm of what I would expect. I don't think that that's excessive in any means. That's real good. So I have no doubt, well, minus the lube situation in the gearbox, that this is going to last a long time. If you have no backlash, that would be bad. It would build excessive heat and really wear the teeth down. And if there's too much, well, then you go and shove this into something and it hits or catches or binds, and next thing you know, you rip all the teeth out because the engagement is like this, not like this. And you just break the teeth right off, shear them off. All right, well, let me go and test this for power consumption. So it's starting to downpour again here. Gotta love it. Anyways, I tested this, hooked it up to my meter, and no doubt this is well over a 15 amp motor in here. Under a fairly heavy load, but nowhere near stalling this. I saw 16, 17 amps of draw. So no joke, this thing will easily trip a 15 amp breaker, even a dedicated breaker, if you actually use it pretty hard. You really want this on a dedicated 20 amp in order to get the most out of this without basically nuisance breaker trips. With that said, what do I think of this? My honest opinion is this is heavier than hell. It could use more RPM, but most of them this size are nowhere near what a 4.5-inch grinder is. The build quality of this is actually pretty decent for what it is. I mean, this aluminum machine casting isn't actually that bad. I mean, here's the reality of it. Harbor Freight, I think, realizes, yeah, there's money in selling junk, but it's not really worth putting your name on something that's so bad that it lasts a couple hours. And that's why I think they really realize that, well, if people are willing to pay Milwaukee and DeWalt money for a halfway decent tool, they probably would pay half of that for something that they could market for like this. And it makes sense. I mean, this thing is probably half of what a Milwaukee or DeWalt of similar size would cost, and they're still making money. And the build quality is good enough, I would say, to justify the price. Now, is this as good as a Milwaukee or DeWalt of this size? Well, I've never taken apart either one of those. If that's something you're interested in, maybe I can come up with one to tear apart and look at. But realistically, for the money, I don't know, this really isn't that bad of a tool. No doubt that gearbox is going to be an issue on this. The lubrication isn't going to get to the gears, and it clearly slings it out, so the seal isn't that good. I would highly recommend every 5-6 months cleaning this gearbox out, putting some new grease in it to help the longevity of it. But realistically, compared to any kind of the cheaper line from Harbor Freight, I think this will last a lot longer. I just wish it was lighter. I wish you guys are here to hold this and start grinding on stuff. It won't take long before you'd be complaining like I was when I was using it. But hey, it gets the job done. With that said, if you got any comments, questions, thoughts on this, if you've used this one and have an opinion on it, feel free to share it. It's probably more valid than mine. With that said, until next time.